like to say a few words about the conversation series. As you know that this is a series where we invite thought leaders, speakers from policy, from the government, professors and other eminent people, those who are deep thinkers. And we invite them for the conversation to have a conversation with one of our in-house faculty. And we have been running this for the past 2 years. So today, similarly, we have a very good group and we'll take it forward. So without delay, I'm very happy to invite everybody and to welcome everybody. And in today's conversation, the format is slightly different. So today's conversation will be chaired by Professor Bina Agarwal. I would like to introduce Professor Bina Agarwal quickly. Professor Bina Agarwal is a professor of development economics and environment at the Global Development Institute, University of Manchester, UK. Prior to this, she was director and professor of economics at the Institute of Economic Growth at Delhi University, where she continues to be affiliated. Educated at universities of Cambridge and Delhi, she has held distinguished teaching and research positions at many universities, including Harvard, Princeton, Michigan, Minnesota, and the New York University School of Law. She was Harvard's first Daniel Ingalls visiting professor and later a research fellow at the Ash Institute, Kennedy School of Government. She has also been a fellow at Radcliffe Bunting Institute of Harvard. Among her best known work is the award-winning book, which I am reading nowadays, A Field of One's Own, Gender and Land Rights in South Asia, this book has a significant impact on government, NGOs, and the international agencies in promoting women's rights in land and property. She is one of the only two women who served on the Commission for the Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress, chaired by Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz and set up by President Sarkozy. She has also been consultant to the Planning Commission of India and is on the editorial boards of several international and academic journals. She has written several papers, more than 100 research papers and policy papers. In 2009, Agarwal was nominated to the board of United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. On 29 March 2010, the Global Development Environment Institute, GADE, awarded her the 2010 Leontief Prize, an annual award named after Nobel laureate Wesley Leontief. She was also awarded and honored with Padma Shri in 2008. And it is an absolute honor for me to introduce Professor Bina Agarwal. We are very happy to have you at Ahmedabad University. Now I request Professor Agarwal to take it forward from here.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. You know, you brought in details of my life, which I'd forgotten. But thank you for that very warm introduction. It's really wonderful to co-host this event with Ahmedabad University and with this special series, The Conversation. So thanks to Jeemol Unni for facilitating this partnership. She's professor, as you know, of Ahmedabad at Ahmedabad University as well, and also an active member of FESDIG. So Professor Sudhir Pandey, we really thank you for co-hosting this with us. And I think the conversation is really an excellent series, some of which sessions I've attended. So I'll say something about FESDIG. Most of you would not know about it. So FESDIG stands for Feminist Economic Saturday Discussion Group. And it's an informal network of interdisciplinary scholars and practitioners whose work relates to gender and the economy. And I started it in November 2013, about 8 years ago, just to serve as a forum where members could present their ongoing work and get detailed critical feedback in a friendly and non-competitive setting, which is becoming less and less common these days. So this helps strengthen our work and to learn from each other. And also we can arrive sometimes at a consensus on policy positions on particular issues. So we have members from JNU, NCAER, IEG, Ashoka University, IHT, ILO, SEWA, Oxfam, ICRW, World Bank, Population Council, UN Women, Gates Foundation, and so on. So everyone who joins FESDIG has to present their work, and we run it collaboratively. Several members take responsibility in inviting speakers and in chairing sessions. And we have a logo, as you've seen, and we also have co-sponsor occasionally events like this time and with ILO and others. So we meet on one Saturday of each month over lunchtime. Earlier it was face-to-face, and ILO provided us with their conference room and even a free lunch, as well as their presence. So we are particularly grateful to ILO for this co-partnership. So since last year, as everywhere else, COVID has meant that we've been holding meetings via Zoom, but we hope to return to face-to-face in the not too distant future. So with that introduction to FESDIG, and I hope some of you who are not part of FESDIG will consider becoming a part of it. So do write to me if you're interested. Let me introduce our speakers for today. Well, the stars are Ratna Sudarshan and Rajib Nandi. Ratna is a trustee and former director of the Institute of Social Studies Trust, and she has been with a national fellow at NEPA and has worked on the research staff of the NCAER. And her research has been mainly on women's work in the informal economy, on education, on research policy, linkages and evaluation. Rajib Nandi is an associate director of ISST Delhi, and with 24 years of experience in gender transformative research and evaluation. Rajib, you must, so good to have you have more men doing gender work. He has worked on women in the informal economy, on social and solidarity economy, apart from program evaluations and evaluative studies. In fact, he's a co-founder and co-leader of the Evaluation Community of India. He's also a member of the governing board of Community of Evaluators in South Asia. So they have a book which we are going to discuss today. And in conversation with them is Professor Jeemol Unni, who is a professor of economics and chair of the MA Economics program at Ahmedabad University. And earlier she was director of IRMA. And she is currently a member of the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics and also of Madhya Pradesh's government's task force on statistics. Her research again is on women's entrepreneurship, on the informal sector, on social protection. And most recently, she has co-authored a book, Women Entrepreneurs in the Indian Middle Class. At some point, Jeemol, we hope to hear more about that book as well. So with those words, everybody welcome. We have a very distinguished group of participants. And I hand it over to you, Jeemol, to start the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this forum from the side of FESDIG and from the side of Ahmedabad University, where Sudhir just introduced our conversation series. So we are very happy to have all of you. Bina, thank you very much for chairing the session, and very happy to have Ratna and Rajiv have in a conversation with regard to this book on feminist evaluation. So shall we start with Ratna and Rajiv giving us a brief introduction about the book?
Thank you.
Excuse me, Ratna, sorry. I just want to remind everybody, please put your comments in chat and questions, and then at the end of the session, I will pick those up and for discussion.
Thank you, Jeemol, Bina, Ahmedabad University, FESDIG, everyone for inviting both of us to talk about this recent book. We actually thought it might be helpful to, because the book is like one part of a series of outputs that has come from our feminists, from the ISST Feminist Evaluation program. So we thought we'll start with a short introduction to feminist evaluation, just as a backdrop to talking about the book, if that's okay. So Rajiv, if you share the PowerPoint, so we'll just do this quickly.
Sure.
So one, I mean, I'm assuming not everyone is necessarily very familiar with the whole field of evaluation. So, you know, it's useful to right at the outset to remember the parameters within which evaluation works. So program evaluation or evaluation in general is a systematic investigation into the effectiveness of a program or policy, and the implication of that is that evaluation is expected to come up with a with a clear sort of assessment. So almost like a yes, no, do we go ahead with this or not? So one can't say yes, but it has to be a yes or a no. In that sense, it is distinct from research. Research has a different purpose, and evaluation has a different purpose. And that's while that is important to note, there's also a very close connection between evaluation and applied research, which tends to be concerned with examining issues on the ground and trying to assess programs and policies. Now, in the last 2 decades, formal evaluation has actually gained a great deal of visibility, partly because of the government flagship programs which required continuous assessment and evaluation, and partly because globally there is today an increasing stress on evidence-based action. So there are several forces at play which are leading to this greater visibility of evaluation. Okay, next, please, Rajiv. So our group has actually focused on one, subset within the whole field of evaluation, which is feminist evaluation. And this is the kind of framework that has been our starting point and that has guided a lot of our work. So we see the principles as being a focus on inequalities. So of course, gender, but also any other axes of inequality that are relevant, such as caste or religion or geographic location, to recognize that these inequalities are structural, that evaluation is political, which really means simply that we are willing to take a stand, and we are willing also to push the boundaries a little bit and not just stop at saying this is what it is, but how can it be improved? What can we do to change the conditions on the ground? Recognizes and values different ways of knowing. This is actually very important. So ensuring that all voices are captured and that no group is inadvertently left out. And in particular to add value to those who are marginalized, but also to those implementing programs, so that evaluation is not done only for the funder to know if that investment has been, how good it has been, but also for those implementing programs, how could it be tweaked a little bit to get a better outcome? Now, given these basic principles, if we know that evaluation is a process, of course, some of these stages may, overlap, but broadly speaking, we need to develop evaluation questions. We need to design the evaluation. Then we need to collect the data and make some judgments and finally, determine what methods are to be used, and finally see how one can make the evaluation useful. So the general idea is that we apply these principles to all these questions, to all these stages. And so as we can see, feminist evaluation, therefore, is really a perspective. It's an approach, it's a way of, looking at evaluation. And this is the broad framework that we all started with. The source is mentioned here. This is Catherine Hayes. This particular diagram was developed by Catherine Hay. Of course, it draws upon work of people like Donna Podams as well. Okay, so I'll just let Rajiv talk a bit about the ISST work.
Yeah. So, before, thank you, Ratnaji, and for providing that conceptual framework of feminist evaluation, the principles and the 5 questions corresponding to the different stages in the evaluation process, from designing to use of evaluation. Before coming to the ISST's work, let me also tell you, the purpose, definitely the purpose is very much linked with the principles and the questions that shape the feminist evaluation. So in terms of application of those principles through the evaluation practice. Now, feminist evaluation puts emphasis on people's experience, the context that shapes the experiences within the barriers of inequality and discrimination, then tries to recognize the roots of the inequality in that particular context, give weights to all perspectives, consequently that adds value to those who are marginalized and those being evaluated, and takes forward the findings and the recommendations that emerge from evaluation into advocacy for change. Now, this doesn't always happen in such a linear manner, but evaluation may recognize even a little change that is evident in the lives of women through evaluation, feminist evaluation, and recognize the contextual constraints that influence the feasibility of recommended course of action and choices. So therefore, it becomes extremely important to share and reflect upon experiences of the evaluation, with evaluation in different contexts. Each particular context provides nuances that need to be captured. So reflective writings could sharpen the influence and the influence, the manner in which they give any given evaluation method is applied or the data is interpreted. Then let me, sorry, yeah. So then let me come to the challenges of conducting feminist evaluation. In the context of the previous slide, we must admit that it is definitely a challenging job for several reasons. First and foremost is the political will of the implementing organizations or the donor organizations, the impact in investors or the government in conducting an evaluation that is fundamentally feminist. Apart from the political will, opportunity of developing that skill and perspective for the evaluation professionals is remarkably limited in India and in South Asia. Then it comes the resources, like online resources are there on feminist evaluation, but they are primarily in English or in Spanish, and not much based on Indian or South Asian context. So that is very, very important. And also, there are big and influential professional organizations of evaluators all over the world. We call VOPI, Voluntary Organization for Professional Evaluation, professional evaluators. But there are not much organization, not many organizations, any such organizations for the feminist evaluators. Yes, there are few networks like Eval Gender Plus, a global partnership that promotes demand and supply and use of equity and gender responsive evaluation. Then ICST runs an online community of practice called Gender and Evaluation. And and last year another exclusive network has been formed called Gender and Equity Network South Asia. So they are there. The groups, feminist evaluators groups are there, but still small if you compare with the mainstream evaluators. And then also challenges in after the evaluation is done to accelerate the use of evaluation finding is definitely another big challenge for feminist evaluation. Now I'm coming to ICST's program on feminist evaluation. Let me also, because it's written here, gender transformative evaluation, let me also tell that at times feminist evaluation, you have seen the principles and the 5 related questions to the principles, but sometimes it's called in different name, though it stick to those principles. Very commonly we use the term here in India, gender transformative evaluation. So ICST started working on feminist evaluation or gender transformative evaluation in 2009. That was a time when evaluation communities were getting organized in South Asian region. The discourse of evaluation was getting sharpened with the question, who are conducting evaluation and what role does evaluation and evidence play in program designing and policy making? And at that key moment, between 2009 and 2010, ICST facilitated an iterative process of reflections and reflective writings with a group of gender researchers, practitioners, evaluators, questioning women's rights and empowerment in a range of sectors, particularly from program and policy perspective. In the process, the importance of a feminist evaluation or gender transformative evaluation was emphasized to understand what is changing on the ground. The process made us understand the importance of feminist evaluation. Simultaneously, we felt a strong need to build awareness and capacity around those critical gender issues, as we didn't have many practitioners with evaluation expertise. So based on our experiences and questions, again in 2011, ICST designed a longer program called Engineering Policy Through Evaluation that encompasses a number of activities from capacity building to network building to resource development, to going and sharing the experiences of evaluators and gender researchers here, then reflective writings to capacity building. So a lot of activities, and then from there, and then from there, we also produced some knowledge products. First one is a special issue of Indian Journal of Gender Studies, which was published in 2012. In this particular issue, the papers, I think 7 papers are there, emphasize the importance of contextualized understanding participatory methods, experimentation and innovation in evaluation, and the role of evaluation in shaping policy perspectives, program choices, and understanding of what is changing on the ground. And papers cover experiences in health, education, microfinance, and empowerment programs. And then ICST brought these three also knowledge products. The first is that toolkit on gender-sensitive participatory evaluation methods, draws on rich experience of the use of participatory tools within an evaluation context, focused on the feminist ethics of listening to the voices of women, while also locating the framework to analyze the power relations within which women live and embedded. Then a resource pack. It was initially conceived as a training module that could either be used as a standalone module as part of a course on evaluation for groups as diverse as development practitioners, evaluators, or within a training institute or university. And these like the materials primarily developed during those iterative workshops that we organized with our small network of evaluation professionals in India. And then the final one is this volume on engendering meta-evaluation towards women's empowerment. This volume actually, is not to so much to tell about about the program as much, but to say that like no range of evaluations of the same programs in different contexts, and to not to forming the judgment of the quality of the project, but on the evaluation. So they are focused rather more on different methods and frameworks that used in evaluation for evaluating different government flagship programs, and in drawing out gender outcomes, for those programs in different contexts, and also to identifying any recurrent patterns of that implications of the program design. And then finally, we came with these two books. The first one in 2018, The Voice and Values, and the recent one, Recognizing Connectedness, the Practice of Feminist Evaluation this year. The first book was primarily examined how feminist evaluation could make an effective contribution to new policy formulations oriented to gender and social equity. And the essays here focus centrally on the structural roots of inequality, giving weight to the perspectives, adding value to the marginalized groups and voices under evaluation, and taking forward the findings of evaluation into advocacy for change. And the second book, the just published in September, the ebook, is primarily again focuses on the limitations of traditional evaluation frameworks, and they also explore institutional factors and barriers which shape and impede individual agency, choice, aspirations, behaviors, and offer new approaches, insights, tools, and frameworks for other evaluation theories and practitioners. So I like to stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Ratna, would you like to add?
We can't hear you, Ratna. So, it would be nice if you gave an example or two.
Sorry. Yeah, so I can start by giving one example of, how we see the difference between feminist evaluation and other evaluations. The example I'm giving is actually from not the latest book, but the one before that, Voices and Values, where Sonal Zaveri conducted a utilization-focused evaluation, of a program with women in tea gardens in Assam. And utilization-focused evaluation is a very rigorous framework of evaluation that comes with certain steps and a certain way of conducting the data and analyzing it. And as the name indicates, it's focused on use, so ensuring that the findings are useful. Now, while Sonal was doing this, and she was very much following this framework, there was a question as to why this was a program that was, intended to sort of help women to speak up in case of violence, and they had set up a whole support structure. And this was not happening with certain groups. So traditionally evaluators are not expected to conduct research. I mean, you just, you don't go off on a limb, as it were. But she did that. She did this little research alongside, the formal evaluation in order to figure out exactly what was going on. So that's, that's when we say approach is different here, the willingness to step outside the boundaries of what is required by the evaluation, and also in order to figure out, what was the problem, what was keeping women from not speaking up, and identifying the gaps in the program. So essentially being willing, therefore, to question the assumptions of the program, which are not normally, most evaluations take those assumptions for granted. But if one is able to do that, to collect some data and evidence to show why the assumption was not valid, as in this case, it allowed the program to, to modify certain aspects of the program were modified, and led to a much better use of the, the whole structure that had been set up. So this is one of the papers we carry in the book on voices and values. And it's, it's potentially useful for people, both because it spells out the framework of utilization focused evaluation, which is, there are now many, many different approaches to evaluation and different methodologies, and it spells out this one very clearly. But then it also shows at what point it became necessary to step outside that framework, to add a few questions, to add some research, collect more voices that were not, not being captured, and come up with something that otherwise would have been missed. So, this is the kind of thing that the papers illustrate. They show, and now if you want an example from the new book, for instance, there's an article by, but several people actually went back to old evaluations. What they did was, so the data had already been collected, but then they wanted to see that if one has these feminist principles up front and you go back to the data, can you actually uncover something different? So, and they did. So in one case, for instance, this was an education program for girls where the idea was that if they remain unmarried till 18, the program was seen as a success. So this researcher went back and actually talked to girls who had been part of the program, but who were, in their early 20s, to see what were the subsequent trajectories and in what ways had the program empowered them, or, or what were the limitations. And that's where we talk about connectedness, because it brings out all the other things that are at play. But so this was one. There was another example was of a study of self-help groups, again, an evaluation that had been completed earlier. And this researcher decided to go back, look at that data, but then also follow up with a few focus group discussions to see, so if the immediate impact of an intervention is positive, does that impact get sustained? And if not, what is standing in the way? And so these kinds of questions brought out the fact that there are other agents. So girls are not, they're not in a position to take decisions around marriage by themselves. So you may not get, you may ensure that they don't get married till 18, but what happens subsequently very much is influenced by the family. And so if you want a program that is really looking to empower girls, you would have to think beyond this, magic age of 18 and the idea of completing a certain number of years of education and so on. So it throws up a lot of questions. There are very interesting findings, but there are also questions. Then there's another interesting paper which actually looks at the framework for sexual harassment. And Rajiv, this is by Anukriti Dikshit and Navdeep Mathur.
Yeah.
So they've looked at the sexual harassment policy, and what they do is a very interesting analysis of the policy itself and of the background to that policy, to argue that if the thinking of society is at odds with what the policy is trying to do, to bring out those gaps. And they've done it in a very interesting way, and with modifications of framework of analysis. So do I just go on, or would you like to?
No. Thank you, Rajiv and Ratna. I would still, you also talk about this, other than feminist evaluation, you also talk about transformative evaluation. So also, can you tell us how this whole idea of evaluation has evolved in India, and feminist evaluation and transformative evaluation, other than you, are there others doing this, or how has this whole field evolved?
So, Rajiv, would
you can start, then I can.
Okay, so I will start just by saying this, that actually so people have been doing evaluations for a long time. So I think the question is fair enough, what's new about this, or why are you suddenly so interested? But there are some specific reasons for that. One is that evaluation did not exist as a discipline till only, a few decades ago. Even we don't have any formal teaching of evaluation in India, but one can do courses overseas. And so the discipline of evaluation, the formalization of, what is evaluation, what are the principles of evaluation, what are the ethics of evaluation, what is expected from evaluators, this all forms part of formal teaching, and, it's a recognized discipline. And this is relatively new. Now, as a result of this development, we have evaluators from the West who come very well equipped with, methods and tools and, frameworks and the whole, and often, some of these frameworks are not very relevant or applicable for our context, but we have not been in a position to actually critique these adequately, because we didn't have enough of our own contextual thinking on evaluation, which understood the tools that, are being used, within these other evaluation frameworks, but could also say why some particular approach is maybe not very relevant and, could be substituted by XYZ. This is in fact what, several of the papers in the meta evaluation and in the Indian Journal of Gender Studies is people doing exactly this. They've taken existing frameworks and shown how they would modify them so as to get, more relevant findings. So this is, because this is something new, this renewed interest in evaluation actually reflects a, renewed global interest, if you like. And our particular brief has been to try and strengthen, sort of ways of conducting evaluation which understand the Indian context, are aware of the tools that are being taught overseas and used by, many professional evaluators. And that's what we've been trying to do. But the evaluation system in India has also changed a lot. Previously it would be mainly researchers from well-known institutions, IIMs or universities, who were asked to be part of evaluations, and they basically applied methods of research, and this is still done. You look at many evaluations, it's a simple application of research methods. But there are actually very interesting evaluation methods which, which can which are quicker and more effective and get more quickly to the evaluation question. Anyway, so I will ask Rajiv to talk a bit about the development.
Just let me give that, this historical perspective of this feminist evaluation, how it emerged actually. Now, as Ratnaji already mentioned, that in the West, it's pretty old. Actually, the evaluation discourse is more than 60 years old now in the West. Okay, and if you look at already this discourse already experienced a series of waves, in the 50s, 1950s, from radical positivist, rationalist, government-focused approach. They used to call it experimental wave, to dialogic wave, where stakeholders were brought in the center stage of the evaluation process, and then the number of participatory approaches and methods also developed towards the end of in 1980s. And in sometime in early 1990s, this also a wave called evidence-based wave, in search of evidence for results, and nothing matters, only the evidence, theory of change, and even random control trials also introduced that time. Now, sometime in 80s or the late 80s, this evaluation wave also experienced another new liberal kind of like wave in the which engulfed the evaluation discipline, and suddenly government was perceived like as more as a problem than solution. Like this is a time when also this new public management movement was also introduced, so emphasized on market thinking, decentralization, deregulation, those kind of vocabularies instead of stakeholders, customers, and clients. And that's the time when a few feminist development scholars and practitioners, they introduced a different kind of evaluation centering on value, rights, equality, and focusing on more on the interconnections of gender, class, race, and the social construction of their different kind of defining characteristics. So I think scholars like Evelyn Keller, Maren Hirsch, Angela McRobbie, sometime in 90s, early 2000, they started working on it, and then later Donna Podems, Julia Espinosa, Sailbeck Bowney, they came and started more started using different kind of approaches and methods to conduct evaluation. And very quickly, development practitioners in Latin America and Africa, they picked up those principles and started promoting this particular approach. And finally, when sometime in 2010s, that time when evaluation also become a buzzword in India, this was a time actually when we also started working on evaluation. So we thought that when this discourse is just emerging in India, just getting a shape in India, this is the time also to bring that discourse of feminist evaluation, bring the questions of inequality, the root causes of inequality, not just to look at the symptoms of inequality, but what are those factors actually creating these kind of inequalities, to look at that. And though it's small, but I think definitely a lot of gender researchers, advocates came together and started working on this thing. Otherwise, evaluation is not taught here. Even in the West, not many universities actually that teach evaluation as such. So I think that's the beginning. And what actually we did that time, these principles and that related questions is basically become the guiding principles for a lot of gender transformative evaluators here in India. And it's taking a shape, I must say right now. Let's see. Yeah, I would like to stop here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ratna and Rajiv. So you also use this term connectedness in your book, and you emphasize, you highlight that. So what do you mean by that? Is it sort of an idea of intersectionality? Is it an idea of interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity? Or what is this thing called? And how important is that for this concept of feminist evaluation?
Want to start, Ratnaji?
So I think connectedness is a term actually that we got out of some evaluation literature. So it's not just a general term, because more recently there have been some evaluation theorists who have argued, we normally have the OECD DAC criteria, right? Which is what is it, Rajiv?
Yeah, five were there initially, and then they added definitely one. But it just very recently they added the relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, impact, and sustainability. Those are the five original.
So usually evaluations are conducted to respond to these five criteria. I mean, it's a very generally accepted framework. But more recently, some theorists have argued that we need to think in terms of connectedness as a separate indicator. And what we found very interesting is that if you look across the papers in this second, in this new book, almost, in fact, all the papers somewhere indicate that the lack of success of a program or the limited success of a program or, some gaps that were not identified came about because we had not looked clearly at connections between different agents in the field. So it's not really about intersectionality. It's about, so for instance, you have a program about girls in school, but then you need to look beyond girls and school. And you may be looking at, a whole series of other external institutions and actors, and understanding the connections between these is, and this is not a standard approach in evaluation. So, which is why it was interesting for us. But maybe Rajiv can throw some more light.
So the argument was that those five OECD DAC criteria, argument was that it's very kind of a static kind of a criteria. It can capture transformation within given society, and they may miss the connections and interactions between agencies and programs beyond the project boundary. So it's then that means it's disconnected from the larger pattern and realities. And I think when these arguments were getting strengthened, and that time in early 2020, OECD DAC also introduced a new criteria. It's called coherence. Okay, so when we are working with on this book, I mean, the connectedness idea was not there with us. But when we saw, as Ratnaji mentioned, that a lot of these papers actually talking about the limitations of agency and sustainability of agency also, because we are looking at those agency maybe in a way in silos. And that time when we started looking for new approaches and what's the new developments in the evaluation discourse, one definitely is this OECD DAC criteria and the change in the criteria and bring coherence to to some extent is also to connect it historically, the progress and the change. And also another, I think, new idea came that time, I think it's maybe in 2017, 18 it started. It's called blue marble evaluation, which is also again it talks about connection, a connection that looks beyond nation state boundary. Blue marble is a much it's wide global kind of a perspective that connect local and the global, human, ecological, different kind of methods, and trying to bring in a larger kind of global system. This is one thing. So we thought that this is also another interesting way. They have not used this word maybe connectedness, but this connections is coming in this new theory also. And another new approach, not new approach, this is a well-known development agency, Active Learning Network for Accountability and Performance in Humanitarian Action. They started using 3 new criteria: connectedness, coherence, and coverage. So here the term connectedness again exemplifies the need to ensure that activities of a short-term project are carried out in the context of a larger term. So interconnected issues beyond the project boundary. And because these papers also somehow, in subtle manner brought that issue of connectedness, I thought this is an emerging thing and also connected with the larger conceptual framework. And it's definitely because it is there in the papers in subtle way, not very clearly, but definitely one paper, Aditi Arur, if you remember Ratnaji, she definitely brought the agency, and when she she questioned even the indicator, indicator is that number of girls unmarried remained unmarried at the age of 18. So she questioning that this is definitely agency. But it doesn't mean that if somebody is unmarried even at 18, doesn't mean she is empowered, or even somebody is married, because still the agency is actually working. So she argues that this program can be looked at from different perspective and can be designed much better beyond these these indicators and the these parameters of indicators. Yeah, I don't know. I may not be very clear, but yeah. Right.
Can I make a small suggestion, which is, could you just in 2 minutes tell us how many chapters there are? What is just about the book itself? What have they covered? What kinds of, like this example of let's evaluate, the program is about raising the age of marriage. So it would give, I think, our audience a little bit of an idea of the kinds of issues that the book contains.
Okay, so this book has seven chapters, and each of these chapters is basically a reflection on, well, they're not all the same. So there are some which are actually new evaluations using a feminist lens, using the principles that we discussed, and and also drawing out what difference it made to use this this perspective of framework. There are 2 or 3 which, as I mentioned earlier, is where people have gone back to old evaluations to see whether they could draw out more information or different information by using a an explicitly feminist lens. So we have the paper by Aditi Arur that Raji just mentioned. We have a paper by Manika Bora, where she was actually part of a quantitative evaluation of girls' cycle to school program in Bihar. And she conducted a set of qualitative interviews, sort of alongside that, and then has basically analyzed those interviews to understand to what what are the limits to agency, in a sense. That's what comes out. We had the paper by Anukriti Dixit and Navdeep Mathur, which we just mentioned, which is looking at the Sexual Harassment Act and looking, which goes into details of the formulation of policy. How does policy get formulated, and what is the underlying reason why these kinds of acts which wish to change actually the underlying social understanding of things, where does that face limits? We have a paper by Rajalakshmi and Lakshmi Lingam, which is actually an evaluation. It's a presentation of a feminist evaluation of a women's health program in Andhra. And then we have a paper by Nutan. Rajiv, what's the name? You're muted.
Sorry, Nutan Jain and Neetu Purohit.
On self-help groups in Haryana, which
no, that is on ICPD.
Oh, sorry. On the ICPD, which is very different, which is very interesting. They have tried to see how the ICPD, or the International Conference on Population Development, whether the indicators that people use in evaluation actually changed subsequent to the ICPD. Are there different indicators being used after that from what was being used before? So has the ICPD actually influenced indicators of evaluation? So that's a very different kind of paper. Then we have this paper on self-help groups in Haryana, which is again a revisit of an evaluation, or rather revisit of the sample that was evaluated in order to again explore what happens after 2 years. And again, what are the limits? Why is it that that progress gets checked? So what is it that blocks it? Then we have a paper by Sonal Zaveri, which is on a program with men and boys, and trying to change gender attitudes by working with boys, sorry, not with men, with adolescent boys. And she also explores at the end that, okay, the program tries to do X and Y, but what are the ways in which the impact gets moderated or limited? And once again, it's the same idea of limits to agency of a particular group, unless you're also working with other groups which influence their thinking. Then we had a paper by Mahima Taneja and Anjali Krishan, which is on open defecation. And what they have tried to look at is, they've looked at WASH programs and, so how far is the evaluation of programs gendered? So they've done a sort of review of several evaluations, some of which they had been a part of, some of which others had done, and critique them from this perspective. So what are the issues that get underplayed, or the gaps that emerge? And so in a sense, so what emerges from all of these is further suggestions on how to improve approaches to even to feminist evaluation. But that's what the book contains. So it's these 7 papers and an introduction that Rajiv and I have written. That's the content of the book.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I see that I went through a number of these articles and I found this, like you said, they're very different from each other as well, the themes, even the method that they're using and so on. And I can see that you have more than one book now that you're telling us on evaluations and feminist evaluation. So now does ISST think in terms of doing more with regards to such evaluations for the global South as a whole, Are you visualizing an international program as well?
This I will request Rajiv to respond.
I'm sorry, I missed that. This what ICIST is doing now
for the Global South.
Global South. Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think I'll mention about two programs that ICIST right now is doing. One is definitely that online community of practice that ICIST runs, which has 5,000 members across the globe. And this is primarily a knowledge hub and knowledge sharing hub for those professionals who practice either feminist evaluation or gender responsive and equity focused evaluation, or in designing programs and intervention in that kind of profession. And this is a network where people seek advice, suggestion from each other. So it's basically a group of lot of people primarily in English, but also we have translation facilities. So Spanish also is one language we cover. But this was blog kind of thing. So sharing ideas and asking for help from others. But apart from that, this community also started now very recently organizing online workshops. So we have in 2021 only we organized 5 online learning workshops on transformative narratives and storytelling, on gender sensitive data, intersectional approaches of data collection and analysis, on empowering voices with participatory video and photo voice method. Last one was on art and creativity in learning and evaluation. So these are the things we are doing. Apart from that, what we have been doing is an online course. So ICIST started this online course. So initially between 2012 and 15, we did that face-to-face learning workshops, and that this resource pack we produced from there. But in 2017-18, we started an online course, a self-paced 10-week long online course on gender transformative evaluation. And that, I think 3 iterations we completed by 2019, and 75 participants completed that course. But now on 1st of December, we are starting again the second, we are calling it Facilitating Gender Transformative Evaluation Part 2, which is basically for the South Asian participants. So it's going to start in December. So it's a complete kind of a course with with different kind of evaluation approaches, frameworks, methods, tools. Okay, will be taught through pre-recorded videos and already uploaded materials, and also understanding of feminist evaluation, its perspective, and also how to do kind of thing how to do how to conduct feminist evaluation, or how to conduct evaluation with critical gender transformative lens. So that's right now we're working on.
All right, I think we have a number of questions in the chat box, and I think I'll hand over to Bina.
So thank you. That gives us only a small window, and there are interesting comments in the chat box. Before I go to the questions, as chair, I did want to pose a couple of things. One was that the examples you gave, Ratna, seemed to be much more about evaluating behavioral changes, rather than saying we are evaluating an economic program. So a question was, your lens of feminist sensitivity, is it particularly important if you're evaluating something which is an intervention for behavioral change, sexual harassment, age at marriage, etc. But would you say it's equally an issue if you're simply evaluating, look, we've had this intervention and has it made a difference to output? So, the standard thing that, let's say, economists do, you have a new institution, and is it more productive than something else? So this is one question. The other was, do you use a feminist lens to look at issues which are nothing to do with gender? Suppose you're looking at the poor, or you're looking at Dalits and other disadvantaged groups. What is feminist about it? And relatedly, is it, suppose is it disadvantage that's different? Is it methodology that's different? Is it, I'm still trying to get a handle on what is specific that you bring to bear, which say somebody evaluating, very poor Dalit laborers in Bihar might not be using. So those are kind of three questions.
Before
and then I have the very interesting chat.
We'll just respond to this. So first of all, absolutely, this is not to say that other evaluators have not thought of issues of equity. Of course they have, and so that's fine. I mean, we don't see that. I mean, we don't feel the need. So feminist evaluation is an approach. We'd love it that everybody adopts this approach, which implies greater. So I'm starting from the last point you made, which implies greater awareness of these issues. Undoubtedly, some other evaluators and some other frameworks would be giving importance to these. So that's not in dispute. Now, coming to your first point about, on the second point, have we used evaluation in non-gender situations? Rajiv, I would like you to talk about your evaluation of the voice messaging service, where we applied a feminist lens to a completely non-gendered program. So he'll tell you about that. And so going back to the initial question, so I think that it's really about highlighting certain sort of highlighting. So behavioral change is very central to change in most. I think you're right. I think most of our work has tended to look at behavioral change, but this is not to say that the feminist lens cannot be applied in any kind of evaluation, because what it is really a tweaking. So for instance, if I'm evaluating an institution, you would be surprised how many people don't even gender disaggregate numbers. So it's not a question of your total students. Who are the students who come in? Who are the students who are not able to? What are the constraints? So you can quickly develop something which is a more positivist approach, if you like, but introduce elements of these concerns. But I would agree that the large majority of the papers we have put together and the work we've done has probably been more concerned with behavioral change, because that is kind of, I think we just feel that's very, very essential. But I think this example that I'm asking to Rajiv to talk about is also very interesting, because ISST was asked to do this evaluation and it had nothing to do with gender, and we did discuss should we even take it on. So Rajiv, go ahead. So how the feminist lens made a difference. Right?
Yeah.
So Rajib, give an example rather than a theoretical explanation.
No, I'm giving an example, very personal kind of experience. Yeah.
Also, say 2 lines about the program itself.
Yeah, so it was basically a program of a very large farmers cooperative of this country with a large telecom service provider, mobile service provider, which basically giving messages, mobile messages, text messages to the rural community, rural people on agriculture related issues. Could be on market prices, like about different kind of other issues they face at the rural level, and also a little bit about other government programs, so that they can tie up with those programs. So 5 messages a day to the rural community through a free message to a group of rural people in India. So it's a big program, actually introduced, I think launched in 2002, and the cooperative actually approached ISST if we can do a pilot evaluation of that program in 2 states, Rajasthan and Punjab, sometime in 2010-11, I think. So when I looked at the TOR, so these are the negotiations and power relations. When I looked at the TOR, it's already done TOR. So the implementing organizations already developed a TOR, developed the evaluation
terms of reference.
Their methods are fixed there. So they have already told that so you have to talk with the user, the mobile phone owner. Okay, and it's very difficult then, because we know from our studies that mobile phone may not be there with women, so we completely miss the women users actually of mobile phone. So that we had a long negotiation with them, it's not the user. Let's look at it from the household level. So we'll collect household level data, not the individual level data, and see, because it's a message is given for empowerment, let's see how the household is as a unit using that information for betterment.
Right.
So that negotiation took place, and also dilemma in us if such a, and all completely like, with an idea that mobile phone only used by men, it's not by women. And this kind of message is only required for men, not for women, because women are not decision makers in agriculture. And whatever slightly on health and education, men can just transfer that message to women. So there's nothing wrong in that. To tell household should be the our interest, the data should be collected at the household level, that they were not very sure.
Right.
And then finally they agreed to do that. Once they agreed to do, they changed the TOR, and when we collected data at the household level, we saw that no, sorry, mobile phone, the SIM may be issued in a number in the man's name, but it may be somebody else at the household actually using that mobile phone and getting those messages. So it's completely different. And we completely use that the kind of messages and who uses that message. So accordingly, we had some recommendations to to come out from that myth that's only used by men.
Yeah.
Actually, adolescent girls, we saw in our data using more mobile phones than even young boys. So not more, but at least at same level. So that changed the perspective of the program design, and then also negotiations with them, how to use that.
Thank you. I mean, it could be argued, of course, that any good gender evaluation, any good gender research should be doing that. So we have a number of interesting questions, and I will take 3 at a time. So Shraddha, Jen, did you want to come in? But please be brief, so that we can get many comments and many people in. Shraddha, if you just unmute yourself and ask, and let's see what you look like. I'm just joking.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I was just curious to know how this approach is different in terms of methods and data collection. So I have a very limited reading of evaluation methods where they talk about treatment groups, sampling, and controlled scenarios. So what cautions can be taken while adopting the feminist evaluation approach? And also, like somebody who's inclined towards qualitative research, like we tend to use sampling methods like purposive sampling or snowball, because we are not inclined towards making big generalizations. That is what, but we look at the processes. Like I look at the processes, not towards the making big generalizations. So what, if I want to adopt something like this, what cautions in terms of methods I should be taking?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Shraddha. Let's take another one. There is a doctor, it was Ayush Kumar, who's a student here at Ambedkar. Would you like to add your question? Unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks very much.
And do put on your video.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So,
go ahead.
I was reading one of the paper on evaluation of Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, and they noted what Professor Nandi just mentioned, that just having bank accounts does not empower women. They also need access to mobile phones, because then only they can access those bank accounts. So I was thinking of it as men in households in those areas where women were having bank accounts, opening bank accounts, because they didn't want to lose their bargaining power, they did not they did not allow women to have mobile phones. So eventually those houses where bank accounts were opened, the number of mobile phones diminished. So I came to understand that there is a structural hierarchy, and power is what is actually making all sort of inequalities, basically in gender equality, where men dominate women and such kind of things. And then there occurs a layers of limit which shackle women for empowering them. So how should we actually make our policies and think in that direction that actually help women to grow in that sense?
So that's more about a program rather than about the evaluation, right? So you're saying it had a perverse effect.
Yeah.
that because the evaluation needed a mobile phone, the Pradhan Mantri Yojana needed accounts for women, in those households, the mobile phones declined. That's what you're saying. But you don't know why they declined. Maybe they just got very poor under COVID. That's also possible. And they had to sell their mobile phones. So anyway, but thank you for that question. So shall we take these two questions, Ratna? They are both very interesting questions.
Sure. So on Shraddha's question, so actually there is no particular set of methods that is associated with feminist evaluation. What we say is that the methods need to be appropriate to the evaluation questions. Now, in designing the evaluation questions, we go back to those principles and make sure that our questions are addressing issues of equity and structural causes and ensuring that, and so on. So once the questions are formulated, then one looks for methods that will help us, the methods and the question have to be aligned. So there isn't actually, which is why it's difficult. So there's no, body of methods or frameworks that we call feminist to distinguish it from, other evaluations. For example, we have utilization focused evaluation as a very clear framework. We have many, many evaluation frameworks which are distinct. So we can have a feminist evaluation using any of these methods, because it's more about ensuring a certain perspective, ensuring that all voices come in, and also reflexivity between the evaluator and the evaluated. So it's more like ethical principles and a certain approach to evaluation. So it's not, there are no fixed methods methods are not feminist, right? What is feminist is the questions you ask, or the people you make sure, bringing voices of people into the picture. And secondly, I think part of your question seems to derive from randomized control evaluations, which have of course become, for a long time, they've been seen as a gold standard in evaluation. So we have actually not done any RCTs, because the kind of questions we've been dealing with required more qualitative approaches. So that doesn't mean you don't collect numbers. So there can be there's a quantitative element to it, but they're more qualitative. Exactly as you said, they will look at process. Those are the sorts of evaluation, not just by us. I don't mean just ISST, but this whole group that's been part of the loose network that we developed. So that's how I would respond to this. And on Ayush's point, I think what a feminist evaluation can do is bring out exactly what you said. So if you apply an explicitly feminist lens to a program that has not thought about many of these discriminations, disadvantages, and so on, you will bring them out, right? Because you will, and I think that was the point of asking Rajiv to speak about that evaluation, because that's what it did. So if you in fact, most programs are gender neutral, so they say, right? So you apply a feminist lens to show what are the gaps and why is it that this program is actually not performing as well as it could, because you just haven't realized these differences in the use of time. For instance, the use of time is very different between men and women. And one of the earliest examples which I thought was very important was, there's this STEP program that the government has, which is a training skill development program for women. And they calculate the returns on any activity that women undertake without giving any value to their time. In other words, you're assuming the cost of their time is zero. So, if you earn 10 rupees and the cost of inputs was 2 rupees, you made a profit of 8 rupees. But what about the value of time? So there are all these things that, if you probe a little more into the assumptions and the design of the program, you can actually draw these out, and that's what we feel that our approach tries to do.
No, on Ayush, thank you. On Ayush's question, Ayush, one might also ask, if there's a perverse effect and cell phones have disappeared, then whose cell phone is sold? So one of the things that happened under COVID was that people got poorer, their savings disappeared, and they might begin to sell assets. So there was a Seva study which said what went was cell phones, but they didn't ask the second question, whose cell phone was the first to be sold if there was more than one in the family. Now, Feminist Lens would ask that question. So in fact, 23 surveys that I had looked at, they had hardly any gender questions. I mean, it was virtually, and they didn't, there was very little probing. And so the sorts of things that you would say, Rajib and Ratna, right, would be that even basic gendering of any kind of simple looking at has this program worked or not, would be a first step towards a feminist evaluation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we have some questions which are more to do with how economists think about this. So we have Jinal Parikh, who talks about difference in difference. Shraddha's question was also about sampling. I don't know if you want to say something on this, which is a more generic thing, that good research, good gender research, we don't call it evaluation, and it's not part of that literature, but good gender research would look at a range of ways of looking at the impact. And so Jinal, did you want to, I've just read out that you're talking about difference in difference, but did you want to add anything to this? Very briefly.
Yeah, good evening. It was a very interesting conversation to hear. And since it was talking about the post-COVID and pre-COVID effect of the program, so that made me think whether we have conducted difference analysis on this particular data, because it will help us understand the differences between the control group and the treatment group, given the intervention, that is the program, I guess, in this case. So has that been conducted? And if at all it was conducted, I mean, how will the results be different? That is what I was curious to know about. And that's why I posed that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, actually we have not done, we haven't done these very quantitative evaluations. So that's one part of it. The other is, how would it make a difference? So I actually don't think that, I think that using a gendered lens even within an RCT framework would make a difference. But I don't have any examples to share with you of how it made a difference. So I think, if I can just add something that Bina's been saying, I think one of the differences, not differences maybe, but one thing that when we talk of feminist evaluation, why we consider it to be something a little different from gender research is that is in what we have described as being political in our framework. So, so most gender research will outline and will indicate the differences. But the idea is to go one step beyond that and actually try and see how would you resolve, if not all, some of the gaps and things that and misunderstandings that have entered into the story. So feminist evaluation, according to people who call themselves feminist evaluators, is a little different from standard gender research because of this additional motivation to change something on the ground.
Yeah, thank you.
You could say, Jinal, you see, these programs are universal programs. Yeah. They're not started as a research program of having a treatment group. The Pradhan Mantri wasn't saying they're not going to give to X. It's not like the vaccine testing program for COVID. So I don't think one can actually do what you're saying. And it shouldn't, this is ex post facto. You come in after the program has been done. So the research is not set up as a research program, if you see what I mean. Yeah, so the tools of economists would be that you prior set up a control group. But But here they're talking about evaluation of programs which have already been conducted. You know, the policy has been introduced universally. Am I right? So, Ratna?
Yeah.
Yeah, but so no, what I was really.
So now can I know? I'm sorry, I must interrupt. There are so many other questions. So if you could follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's Sudhir, Dr. Pandey, you had a question, and then I'd like to ask Ravi Verma, who's also done, they've done transformative approaches to evaluation, if he had a comment as well.
Yeah, so I can go ahead in the meanwhile. I mean, this is a question that Dr. Nandi raises, and this is a question to him because in one of his papers, he talks about this, how to bring this feminist evaluation values in the finding. So I would request him to respond to that, how do you apply this framework and how do you influence? Is there any way out?
Okay, let's take that, Dr. Nandi.
Yeah, I don't know I'll be able to answer very clearly, but I can share our experiences. I know to how the way we design the evaluation based on those feminist principles and those associated questions, and then in each stage of the evaluation we try to put that value. Okay, so that value for the most marginalized groups of people in that, for those that program has been designed for. Now, but then this is the one side of the story. Now, in the next level, you need to take it to see that if this finding is used by the policymakers or the people who are intervening or people who have designed this program. I think these are a lot of negotiations there. And not always it's a lot of discomfort and tension actually also is created there when you share your findings with these implementing organizations or the donor organizations sometimes. So this is a tension which is always there with all kind of evaluations, not with only with feminist evaluation. And that's why the people who talk about the professionalization of evaluation, professionalize the evaluation to create the professional evaluators, they always say that it's more important to know about the perspective, know about the value of evaluation, and actually why I am doing the evaluation. That question is much more important than to say that this particular program is doing good or bad, and where it has gone wrong and where it is doing right. Because we need that lot of these negotiation skills, and that becomes very, very important when it comes about the creating that value, so that it's used by the donor organizations or the implementing organization. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Ravi, did you want to add very briefly, since ICRW does evaluations as well? Yes, Ravi Verma.
Yes. Thank you, Binaji. Thank you so much for pulling me into this. It's such a fascinating conversation and work. I just put in my comments appreciating this. Me and my colleagues have been engaged in not only evaluating, but also implementing gender transformative programs across different settings and in different communities, schools, and within the sports and panchayats. So those programs were designed to be achieving gender transformative outcomes in some ways. But more often than not, the evaluations of those programs that follow traditional framework of pre-post control and experimental design always fell short of giving us the nuanced understanding of the power dynamics that was changing or not changing, or at what level it was changing. And as a result, we always have been little dissatisfied at the end of the day with those evaluations, which ended at the level of KAP kind of indicators or some kind of quantitative indicators that showed that, yes, they have achieved a greater retention in schools, or a far more, penetrative ideas about gender relations that in the attitudes of the teachers or students. But did that change really mean that there is a sustained power relation change, or what are the backlashes that it has really built in as a part of those process of change? Is this change desirable in that context? Because in some of the contexts, those changes may not be desirable because they were bringing much greater exposure to vulnerabilities. If the overarching gender norm or gender practices are conservative, orthodox, then any change in the gender transformation that we want to bring puts people more at risk. But we found that yes, there were tensions of this kind where individuals had changed their attitudes, and we were happy that look, program did change, but we didn't know unless and until we did a deeper probing as by way of additional qualitative work to see if it has created greater vulnerability into those. So I think we need to bring this kind of perspective and be always on our guard that the feminist evaluation means really looking at the power shifts that are happening as a result of program. And are we capturing this? Even if we are building into the program, we are not capturing in the evaluations, in fact.
Right.
Because we have to end somewhere. Most of these programs are time bound. So I just wanted to make this comment. I have no questions, but I think this is an ongoing struggle for all of us all who are engaged in this, that we do a program, we evaluate, we think we have taken a step forward, but we fall to a step back. In many of the programs, because programs have very different implications in different contexts. Right. And we don't get that nuanced sense in the traditional evaluation framework. All I just wanted to thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, Ratna, you talked about sustainability as one of the criteria, and that requires you to return. Maybe you need iterative evaluations rather than a one-time one. You go back to the community long after the program has ended. So that's a very important point, Ravi. Thank you. There's the Deepa Sharma. You had a quick question, and also I wanted to ask Sonal, who's been involved in evaluation. Maybe she could provide a couple of insights on any of these questions which have arisen. So first, Deepa, Dr. Deepa Sharma, did you want to add a quick question? And we'll have to be brief, I'm afraid. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Bina, and hi, Rajiv, and hi, everyone else. Just wanted to check, there was a lot of, buzz around in the corporate sector about social audits and so on. And how critical is feminist evaluation to that? And how can that be sort of taken forth from just the developmental sector to the corporate one? Right. And also there was, I remember, Rajiv, in early 2000s, I think IFSC was doing an intra-household level, check on gender budgeting, on whether women actually got any access in decision making. So was that also a part of, in a sense, this whole feminist evaluation that we are talking about?
Okay, yes, Ratna, Rajiv, if you could very briefly answer these. Especially the first one, I think the first one.
So it's a very interesting question about how feminist evaluation could influence social audit.
Yes.
I mean, I think we have seen how gender questions have been incorporated into social audits by, many people. Social audits of, particularly I'm thinking of the Manrega program, where a lot of gender issues have been brought out by evaluators, through their the manner of conducting the social audit. But I haven't seen anything more formalized on this question.
But in practice, would you not say, I saw a social audit conducted by Aruna Roy's group in Rajasthan, and they were looking at whether the women who had been promised a taxi when they were pregnant for delivery, they'd got it or not. And simply bringing in so a lot of things had been written that they had been paid, and then it was probed and they found that the money hadn't been paid, they had simply entered all the women who were due. In terms of, and they said, well, 100% it's 100% success, but it actually happened that there was no audit. So of course, this good common sense, you'll say, but the fact is that they had, when they talked to the women themselves, it revealed a different picture. So I would put it into your kitty, would you not? Of
yes,
feminist evaluations. Yeah. Sonal, did you want to? You have since you've been part of this, would you want to add a word or two?
Sure. Thanks a lot, and my pleasure to be here. I'm also the co-chair of EvalGender Plus and the coordinator of the Gender and Equity Network South Asia, GENSA, that Rajib mentioned. And the intention was to kind of localize gender and equity issues within South Asia and to bring that lens of contextualization. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things that, there was a question about what are the methods that one should use. I think one is central is that any method that is used in feminist approach has to be participatory. I think this is central to our thinking, and it has to be use focused. And in terms of the values, this is a very unique combination of feminist evaluation, is that we don't just talk about methods and tools, but we talk definitely about power and structural inequities. So you have to color everything that you are investigating, evaluating with that lens of power and inequity. If you look at the DAC criteria, there is nothing about power and inequity. It's a huge gap. So unless we add the feminist approach, we are not going to assess any of those inequities. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that the values of the evaluator are absolutely critical. If you do not have an equity lens, you will not be able to do a feminist evaluation. So the ethics and values of a feminist evaluator are critical. It also means you have to take a political stance. You have to be advocating for change. So it's a very different from, say, if I'm doing an RCT and I'm a very objective evaluator and addressing a certain issue. Here I am making a judgment call on where the power is, where the inequity is, whether it has been addressed, if there is a backlash, as Ravi mentioned, and if so, has the program addressed it? And so that has to run through. And I have to say that currently there is a lot of discussion that the DAC criteria do not address gender rights, human rights, they are linked. And it is something that feminist evaluation is trying to talk about more and bring it into the global evaluation discourse, as well as in our countries.
Thank you. There are evaluations that one does on the basis of programs which have been launched by the government for all sorts of reasons. And then there is the notion about, does something have an impact, which is a lot of discussion within the economics field, which is RCTs.
My brief response to that is around the limitations of the indicators. In fact, the quantitative, by and large, an over-reliance on the quantitative indicators that at least in my own experience, I've seen, we try to capture so much within those indicators. They tend to lose that nimbleness of interpretation, allowing us the interpretation of the interconnectedness or the intersectionality. That is where I think the lens of feminist lens really helps us to identify what are the things that we would capture as part of the large picture, macro picture, and what are the things that we would probe by what ways, in what ways, and why. Very often, most of these evaluation researchers use tools with very ambiguous boundaries, mixed boundaries of what is measured as qualitative, what is measured.
Yes, well, that could be one part of it, but yes, but not the whole of it. Not the whole of it. I think it's worth thinking about. When we talk about evaluation, is there a spectrum of approaches? Some which are very quick and others which are of different ilk. Do you think, Ratna and Rajib and Jeemol? Janvi's got a hand up. So very quickly, yes, go ahead, Janvi, and then I'll ask Jeemol to weigh in.
So my camera is just taking a while to come on.
Your hand good and strong.
Yes, no, it'll come on. Yeah. So You know, one of the other things that I've been listening to some of the conversations on the platform that Rajiv spoke about, which is this, community of people who are looking at gender evaluation. One of the things that they speak about as a challenge is also the costing. And often the people costing both in terms of money and also in terms of time. And that, very often the donors or the people who commission these evaluations are very, very slow, are not willing to commit the additional resources that are required when you have to go in depth. And, which it requires either qualified people and additional time. And this was across the globe. So there were these people who are from different parts of the globe who were talking, both first world, evaluators, or those who were located in the global south and doing researches in the global south or doing evaluations. And I think that's something that, we all need to also look at along with the indicators to also see that, is that really an additional cost? Because on the one hand, we are saying that it's like just additional research or, it's like research. But I think there is something more that is there, which will make an evaluation gender transformative or, feminist. And we need to be sharply be able to argue why that is so important to be invested in.
Thank you. Yeah. So what we're saying is it's a gender transformative lens, not the evaluation can't be gender transformative, but the lens through which you look at it. Right. Correct? Yeah. Jeemol, please.
Yes, I think we've had a very, very interesting conversation, and I think Ratna would like to leave, so she says, and we're past 5:30.
Yeah, so, I'm just going to close with your comments.
Sure. So yes, I think it is, I think the questions that the economists here, or the ones who listen a lot to economists raising the questions of this randomized control versus treatment, is quite an issue, actually, at least in the community of economists.
When Janvi said somebody wants a quick evaluation, you're given 2 months, that is not very conducive to the kind of rigor you might need to actually satisfy those of us who might say, well, is it causal or not?
So then we shouldn't call it evaluation. That's all I would say.
Okay. So let's, so thank you. Okay, so let's then ask, final word to Ratna and Rajiv, that if you're not making an effort to control for all the confounding factors, can we actually say, look, this is because of the program, and therefore this is an adequate evaluation? I think it's a big question.
Yes, it's a very big question.
People will hate economists for this. Ratna will give you the final word, and then Jeemol.
No, I would just like to say thank you to everyone. It's been a very interesting session with lots of good questions and lots of things we need to be able to put across more clearly, I think, than we may have done today. So thank you for that and for forcing clarity. I think obviously there is a spectrum of evaluations. There are different views on what is acceptable rigor and what is not. So I think the whole effort of this feminist evaluation program has been to recognize that even with qualitative methods, one can work towards greater clarity and greater rigor. And that is more in the sense of having the logic of your analysis very clear. Which is why we find that framework useful, because as you go through each stage of evaluation, you again revisit what it is you're trying to do and so on. I know we've had all these problems of not enough time, etc., but the more experience you have, the easier it is to actually infuse a certain element of rigor, even when you don't have a great deal of time. So anyway, just to say thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody. Jeemol,
over to you. Would you like to say anything? Last words, last words?
Yeah, no, just one thing. I mean, just a personal experience very recently. Someone from was doing PhD on different kind of like evaluation reports produced in India. And he was also interviewing me. And at the end, he told me, I have evaluated so many evaluation reports produced both by the different central government ministries and the non-government organizations. They don't look like evaluation reports. So, so it's something else. And second, just to Janvi was definitely mentioning these constants. Let me tell you, this feminist or not feminist evaluation definitely is challenging right now, because if you look at the budget, the evaluation, the budget for monitoring and evaluation primarily is very, very small, particularly in this part of the world. Even like 5% of total program cost in for evaluation is considered as a big kind of a budget for evaluation. I'd like to stop here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Yeah,
yes.
sure. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bina, for chairing this, and Ratna and Rajiv, and all the questions that came up. And I think this whole, I think that question is still in the air with regard to what exactly is a foolproof evaluation. Are we moving from correlation to causation, or does this kind of descriptive evaluation really get us there or not? And I personally think that there is a very great value to qualitative ways of looking at looking at this, evaluating programs in this fashion. But yes, for an economist, it's maybe not good enough. So I'm glad that this issue did come up at the end of our thing, because it will remain sort of a thing, as even if we say interdisciplinary, even if we say we are using sociology and economics lenses and so on.
Yeah, thank you so much, FESDIG and the people who joined today. We are thankful to you for collaborating with Ahmedabad University for the conversation series and bringing this topic. And we wish you all the best for future talks that you organize, if there is anything that we can invite, collaborate. And thanks to all those people who have joined today.